Okay, if you could start by just saying your name on camera and the squadron that you were in, sort of as a...
I'm Robert E. Fox, 715th Squadron. I was a radio mechanic.
And how did you get over to England? What was your...
I came over as a replacement radio mechanic.
And what did that, what was your job as a radio mechanic? What did you have to do?
Well, that was meant pre-flighting the radios for all of the planes. I was specifically assigned to the 715th, which meant that when the planes came back in, we would have to pre-flight them, make sure all the equipment was working, including the intercoms, and then sign the flight log that it was okay. Because without a signature on the flight logs, they couldn't let the planes fly.
And you came over by boat?
I came over by boat.
Do you remember which one? Do you remember the name?
His Majesty's ship, the Samaria, which has actually brainwashed me against cruises since 1945. Fortunately, I came back by air in one of our own planes, Old Glory.
And did you have any preconceptions about England and what you might find there, or what the people might be like? What did you expect to find?
Well, don't forget I was 18. And at 18, you're too young to be afraid. As a matter of fact, going overseas, I found it exciting to watch the ship go up and down and up and down, and the Canadian corvettes going through looking for German subs. And the surprising thing is I wasn't afraid. And it's not because I'm so brave, I was too young and stupid. But I had no preconception of the people of England. I got along very well with those in the civilian life that I met.
And when you did finally arrive at Seething, what did you find?
Well, the first thing, I was assigned to the 715th, and I went to the office and introduced myself, and the lieutenant in charge of personnel told me to go to the radio shack and introduce myself to Sergeant Mislinski. So I did, and he said, well, let's see what you can do. Go out to the 715th and pre-flight, and he gave me a couple of planes. I said, how do I get there? He said, there's a Jeep outside. So I said, I can't drive. So he said, so walk. So I walked. And no, strike that. I took the Jeep. And one of the other men came out very much amused at the fact that I was wrecking that Jeep, and he drove me out to the 715th. And as a matter of fact, his name was Harrington, and he became my buddy and in a way my mentor, because my experience was not on 24s, but as a radio mechanic in training. I had no idea which planes I would be pre-flighting. He was a very close friend of mine.
And when you finally sort of got into it and you were doing your job on the planes and back at the radio shack, or did they have little, on the hard stands where the planes would sit?
Yes.
Did you had like some sort of little sheds there, right? Were there some sort of little sheds there where you sometimes had like equipment and things?
No, we all had our own tool kits, which were locked. But to shorten things, we would each, it seemed, carry a long nose plier and a pair of dikes in our pocket. And that was a shortcut to, instead of having to carry a lot of equipment. I might say that as the more you worked on those planes, the more you developed a love for them. I mean, here it is 2007, and there's still an affection for the B-24, which was like ancient history. And through the years with the 8th Air Force Historical Society, there's a joking battle between the B-17 and the B-24 men. The B-17 men say that the B-24 was the box that the 17 came in. You know, that kind of joke. But you do develop a love for the plane. I don't understand it, but it's there.
And do you recall any experiences of Seething Village?
Yes. Well, mainly I spent my time off. I would accumulate 3 days and go to London because we were able to get a pass once a week. Rarely did I go into Seething, just to get off the base. And the one night that I did was the night of June 5th. And I had picked up my pass at 5 o'clock. And at 5:30 I heard the base was frozen. So I went into town anyway, figuring this is another false alarm for D-Day. And when I came back to the base, all heck was breaking loose because that was D-Day. I had my Class A uniform on, and I never got out of my Class A's until 8 o'clock the next morning because we had, if I recall, 3 missions that night, and it was constantly a case of pre-flighting the planes as they came in. But fortunately, all of the planes that were my responsibility were okay, so no time was lost.
And what was your sort of working routine? Obviously, you were working.
Well, when the planes would come back, on average at 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the first thing we would do would go out and pre-flight them. And maybe we had 6 or 7 planes, and once those were finished, then I would be free for the evening. If they weren't finished, then I'd have to have, it would be delayed if there were real problems. If there was a funny thing that I'm reminded of, I had another radio mechanic, a man by the name of Ben Beckerman, who was a farmer from Kansas. Now, when you live in Kansas and in those great big expanse, you can't call the plumber if you need a plumber, can't call the electrician, you have to do it yourself. One night I had trouble with the push button control button for the pilot's connection to the radio. Somehow or other got disconnected. I couldn't get in there to pull it out. So I went back for some help. Ben Beckman, with his great big ham hocks, came out and he was able to pull it out without any problem so I could resolder it. But little experiences like that stick in your mind, including one night we had to replace the radio compass, which was a piece of radio equipment sitting on top of the plane. And it was November, and I had the sheep-lined pants on, and my job was to sit on top holding a screwdriver so that Harrington underneath could loosen maybe 20 or 30 screws so we could replace it. I was never as cold in my life. The cold of that metal went right through the pants. It's funny how you remember certain incidents.
What about, do you recall any accidents between sort of ground personnel, maybe with bombs on the ground, or obviously the metal and the weight of the planes and things?
Well, I remember one night one afternoon we're waiting for the planes to come back. And one came in with the bomb bay doors open. And we're standing there, and all of a sudden a bomb drops out and goes skipping along the runway. Well, all of us ran. What happened is they couldn't unleash that bomb. And as I understand it, the bomb was fused. I was telling a story one night to somebody at a reunion, and he said, "You laugh." He said, "I was the armament man who had to defuse it." And I remember another night one night I'm pre-flighting my planes, everything's fine, and I call, hello, Bright Green, this is Red Jacket, how do you read me? That's the call to the tower to see if the radio's okay. And he said, Red Jacket, get off the air. So what happened was there was a plane in distress that he was trying to talk in.
What was London like during the war years?
Well,
what did you do? Where did you go? What did you see?
you want the version that can be on camera?
Well, it's up to you.
Okay, I'll start off with one day. My first visit, I stayed the first night at the American Red Cross Club. And the next morning I decided to go out on my own. And I walked across, I think it was Westminster Bridge, along the South Bank, and then back across on London Bridge. And that's the way to see London, not with a guided tour. And of course, at that point, I met a WAF who invited me home to have tea with she and her family. That was a very lovely experience. That's the kind that you can put on camera. Other ventures will not...
disclose. Okay.
I might tell you, since you asked about London,
Yeah.
I believe I had to take the last train for Norwich was something like 5 in the afternoon. At that time, it was a 5-hour trip. Well, for some reason, I missed the train. The next train after that was a milk train, which was all night long, making all kinds of stops. I guess I didn't get back to the base till 3 in the morning. Today, it's a 1-hour journey.
How did when you first met local English people, how did they react to you? I mean, I've heard stories. I mean, because obviously people sort of English had their own preconceptions about Americans. Did they all expect that you were all from New York or?
For some reason, I had no problem at all in adjusting to them and they to me.
How did you pass the time on base? How did you unwind, other than sort of going to London when you were on base?
The movies. They had movies at our base. As I recall, maybe they changed them every 2 or 3 nights, and most of us went to that. I was not into drinking, so that was not the relaxation. And there were, conversations around the potbelly stove, and you develop relationships, especially when you're together for a year and a half, as we were.
And what was the relationship like between ground crew and flight crews?
I think the crew chiefs were more, the top engine mechanic were more in touch with the air crews. I didn't have that much connection with the air crews, but it was in later years at some of the reunions that it was expressed by the air crews how grateful they were to the ground crews who kept the planes flying. And I have always felt that I never signed the flight log unless I was sure. If I had any doubts, I'd go back for help, recognizing the vital need of these radios. Speaking of time off, I remember during the buzz bomb problems, at one night around 5 in the morning, those of us who were asleep, I remember hearing a noise, and I looked up to the right, and Harrington was in his bunk, up on his elbow, and said, "What the blink, blank, blank is that?" And it was a buzz bomb that fell maybe a quarter of a mile away. And again, too young to be terribly frightened. Speaking of being frightened, the night of the ham raid, Harrington and I were standing on top of a dugout shelter and watching the incredible action with the German planes and our planes trying to get in. And we both looked to the right, and there was a plane coming directly at us. And you could tell the alternating bright lights, which were their machine guns, at us, trying to strafe ground personnel. Well, I have never moved faster in my life into that dugout.
So that was the night when the intrusion...
The ham raid was the...
Was that with the 410s?
I think it was April 21st.
Okay. And that was what? So that was the time when the planes piled up at the end of the runway?
Yeah.
And did you see
And
that?
if there are 90 people who were registered here, there are 115 different stories as to what happened that night. The real latrinogram, now that's where the rumors are. If you wanted to know what was actually happening, you'd go down to the latrine. Theoretically, we were trying to trap the Luftwaffe by having a late afternoon mission and coming back after dark. Theoretically, the 9th Air Force was to be at landfall south, and the RAF to be north of landfall. And as we came in, they were going to jump the Luftwaffe. The only thing is, that went wrong is the 9th Air Force didn't show up, and the RAF didn't show up. This is just strictly a latrinogram, and that was what was supposed to have happened that night. But it was a nightmare. I think we were out of commission for a whole week. We lost that many planes.
Because I read a whole book about that whole account about that incident, and I remember there was a bit where someone said that someone had left one of the hangar doors to a T2 hangar was slightly open.
Yeah.
Which was spotted.
That was
They bombed it.
Yeah, that was the light. We were supposed to have no lights on at all. Yes, it was all kinds of chaos.
So what were your actual the dates that you were there and the date that you left?
From I think February of early of 44 to June of 45. I was there a year and a half.
Did you ever meet or hear any stories about any of the sort of Hollywood guys or any sort of famous people that maybe came over to entertain troops, like Jimmy Stewart or Clark Gable?
Yes, Jimmy Stewart was not at our base, but from what I understand, he was a tremendous leader. I mean, really inspiring type of a leader. And he had the respect of the men under him, not just because he was a Hollywood glamour guy. He was in the 17s.
Ah, right.
As I recall.
Okay. What about, you said about it being cold. How was the weather? I mean, I know that winter was particularly bad, so how did that affect your mood or your morale or your day-to-day, your work?
I don't remember morale being bad. Of course, there's always, soldiers always gripe. That's part of the, comes with the territory. But our morale was overall pretty good. I guess there was a feeling that the Air Corps was the elite of the armed forces, and I would look forward to the 3-day passes. I very rarely went into Norwich. The first pass I ever got, I went into Norwich, and I went to the movies in the afternoon, and I remember flashed on the screen, air raid warning crash, something like that. The only people that got up to leave to go to the shelters were the American soldiers. In other words, the The English were so used to this that it just rolled off their back. I do remember another incident. In London, I was having lunch at a restaurant called Kentner's off Shaftesbury Avenue, which at that time was a fancy restaurant, and now I understand is a pizza joint. And I was sitting with this young lady, and we heard a buzz bomb, and it cut out. And I grabbed her hand and ran to the back of the restaurant because there was a great big plate glass window. And the doorman didn't budge. He just stood there as though nothing were happening. It's funny how you remember certain incidents like that.
I also read, when I was reading that Pat Everson gave me some stuff that I think that you'd already sent to her, written, that she'd asked you some questions about your experiences. And there was a story about, there's a lady that you were seeing in London, and there was your mum had some reservations about her?
Well, yes. That's true. I met a young lady in London, and we were very much attracted to each other. And she said that she was a doctor. And one day, I remember, I think at Whitechapel Hospital. So one day, she didn't show up for our date. I went to Whitechapel Hospital, and there was no Dr. Murray. So it made me suspicious. But nevertheless, my mother, when I told her that I met this young lady, was convinced that she was a German spy. That's the story I told Pat. But I have no idea what happened to this young lady, but it was a very nice growing up romance.
Do you recall, I mean, you said you only went to Norwich a couple of times. Apart from when you went to the movies, I mean, did you ever go out to like any clubs in Norwich, or did you go to the clubs?
When you say Norwich, I remember one thing, that there was a restaurant, I guess like a tea room, where they had an omelet. I don't know if it was real eggs or powdered eggs, but it was the most delicious omelet I ever ate in my life. And this was, I still don't know whether it was for real, but I guess we were without eggs for that long that it was really a treat.
And what about local kids? Did you ever attend any of the parties that they
No.
threw? Or there was no? Were the kids at the parties, candies and stuff?
No, I don't remember that.
Buzz bombs you spoke about. What about rumours? Did you ever hear any sort of, in times of war?
Oh, well, that's why you go to the latrine to take care of ablutions, but also to find out what's actually happening, because that's where the truth would be found out, known as latrinograms. Oh, yes, with an army comes rumors. And of course, at the end of the war, our relaxation was counting points, because if you had enough points, then you could go home.
So at the end, for ground crews, obviously with flight crews they had a mission quota. So how did it work for ground crews?
Points.
Points.
But I was there till they closed our base, and I volunteered to go home by air, and there were probably 10 of the crew and 10 of ground crew. Those planes were pretty well loaded, and we flew from there to Prestwick, from Prestwick to Reykjavik, and then we'd have to wait. We waited about 4 days for a favorable wind that would give us some kind of an odds-on chance to reach Goose Bay, Labrador. The wind was finally favorable, and the pilot, I remember, wanting to use all of the runway he could, revved up the engines as much as possible, then released the brakes, and I was standing in the bomb bay, and my arm flew back against the bulwark and smashed the glass on my watch. But actually, I enjoyed coming back home. I spent most of my time standing between the pilot and the co-pilot. It was just fascinating.
Is that a ring? Oh, is that a ring? Oh, yeah. Go back a minute, we've got 16 minutes of it.
I remember one thing that might be of interest. Oftentimes, a radio operator would say, "Look, I don't care what you say, it doesn't work in the air." So I would volunteer to go up as the radio mechanic. Now, this was strictly against the rules, but I'd go up anyway and to pre-flight it in the air. I did that on a couple of occasions. I loved to fly.
So was that when they went on a mission then? Were you...
No, that was on a practice run in England. I didn't fly on an actual mission.
Sure.
Speaking of missions, at the end of the war, they to show the ground crew what it was like, I went up in one of those planes. It was a fascinating journey. We went south over Belgium, and I asked the pilot if I could fly, and he said, "Sure." So, when you fly in formation, if a plane ahead of you hits an air pocket, you'll hit the same air pocket, so you don't have to make any corrections. But when I saw the plane ahead making a correction, I'd make a correction. And after the 20 minutes was up and the co-pilot came back into the seat, I went to the rear of the plane and they were all throwing up because the tail was whiplashing because of my over-controlling. Now, I didn't tell anybody it was me that did the damage. On that plane, we flew north on the Rhine River in May, which when you hear of the Black Forest, it sure was. It was gorgeous and also horrible as we passed these cities that were completely bombed out. Our pilot, I remember, I guess if you had your life at risk on those missions, decided to have a little fun. And he opened the bomb bay doors and flew over a prisoner of war camp. And we saw all of the prisoners scatter. They were frightened that they were actually going to be bombed. Another incident on that day is I'm standing in the bomb bay, and I look to the right, and there's the wing of a plane almost inside the bomb bay. It was an RAF pilot, and he saluted and went away. It was kind of like a greeting. It's funny how you remember those things. I remember it though it were yesterday.
Did you ever have? I mean, did you solely work on B-24s then? I mean, there must have been
Just B-24s.
But from time to time, other planes would land at the base if they were in trouble, or?
Yes, some English planes might have come in, and if that was the case, one of the senior radio mechanics may have taken over. For example, Harrington was in electronics before the war, so he was halfway there. You know, the funny thing how the Army does things, there was a piece of equipment called, I think it was called SCRS 84 or something like that. It was this on the dashboard of the plane where the pilot could come in blind if the crosshairs were perpendicular. So they sent me to Wales to a school where I was supposed to learn how to install that truck, which was at the end of the runway. So after a week I come back and the truck is already installed. They had delivered it, and some of the senior men looked at the manual and figured it out themselves. Well, I guess we won the war anyway, and the reason for that is that we had more to waste than they did.
Oh, you mean in terms of like numbers?
Numbers of people, numbers of planes, numbers of equipment, guns, everything.
So was that, I mean, did you, before you came over, obviously with propaganda and things, no one was aware that the losses had been so great for the 8th.
No.
And how did, I mean, I know morale was generally high, but how did that affect people? I mean, did you suddenly dawn on you when you got there? Was there a definite...
Well, I think the brunt of the losses was really before I got there. There were plenty of losses because I remember I was supposed to maybe pre-flight 7 planes. I go out and there's only 5 planes there. You know, that made you feel kind of funny and grateful that it wasn't you.
Nose art.
Pardon?
Nose art? You know, the guys used to paint on the planes and stuff.
Yeah.
Did you ever any experience of that?
Well, the plane I came home on was one of our own, Old Glory. And, yeah, Piccadilly Lily, and I remember that was gave an individuality to some of the planes.
It's interesting how it was sort of only, it's sort of exclusively an American thing, whereas British and even Germans didn't seem to have, you know, didn't personalize their planes in that sort of way.
Well, I think, if I recall, the pilot had the right to name the plane. For example, that 17 Memphis Belle was because of the pilot's girlfriend, whose name was Belle. And I remember a big-time operator. You know, it was a morale builder, actually.
What about sort of dances? Do you go to any sort of dances?
Funny thing, I never went to any of the dances on the base, but I understand that the enlisted clubs had those. What I remember of the base was we were very fortunate. The cook that we had, or that was assigned to the 715th, was actually a cook in civilian life. So he would dress up chicken Mexican one night and chicken francaise the other, and actually figure out how to do it with what equipment he had. So the food wasn't bad at all.
How did it feel to, I mean, when you eventually got home to the States, what did you do what did you do straight away when you got back home?
When I got back home?
Yeah, what were your priorities when you got home?
Well, as the saying goes, funny you should ask. A cousin of mine was to be married, I think 24 hours after I got back home, but I couldn't get a pass. But I went to the barber shop because I really needed a haircut. And I said to him, listen, I'm home now, and I want you to put a wave on this side of the hair and the part here. Don't cut it too close here. And he nodded and said, yep, yep. And with that, he takes an electric razor and goes zoom, and gave me the most god-awful crew cut I had ever had in my life. I remember losing my temper, and I went after him, but they broke us apart. This is a true story.
Did you ever play any sports on base? They had like some American football games or
No,
baseball type things?
No. But I remember coming home, we were very annoyed that we had to go through customs. Now here we are, some of us had put our lives at risk, those of us who had come home, and we had to go through customs. That was the most insulting. And to some of the men who figured they've had their rifle all these years that they were overseas, they're going to take it home. Nope. Go through the line, you got to turn your rifle in. And there were some riots there because these men didn't want to turn in their rifle. But there were MPs there for just that purpose.
And did a lot of guys have like a lot of other souvenirs and stuff?
Yes, there were.
What sort of stuff? Do you remember anything in particular?
There was a lot of money that came home from winnings of in crap games, etc. I never got into that type of experience. The biggest gambling I ever did was on His Majesty's ship to Samaria, going over. We would play 21 for packages of cigarettes, which cost a nickel a pack at that time. Halfway over, I had a barracks bag full of cigarettes that I had won at 21. By the time we got to Liverpool, I was bumming cigarettes because I got careless in playing 21 as an amusing incident.
How long did you spend in Liverpool then? Not very long?
Liverpool is where the boat came in. It was
Did you have to spend a certain amount of time there before you...
No, right off the boat onto a train. You know, you didn't realize going over how big the convoy was until we got to the northern part of the Irish Sea and saw all of these boats converging on this narrow gap. It was unbelievable how many boats there were.
And you mentioned submarines and the Canadian corvettes. Was that something that you guys were always... Did you have like drills and things?
No, well, they asked us to put on life jackets, and every once in a while there'd be a drill. But these corvettes would weave through the convoy looking for subs.
And do you ever have any experience on that ship with like different types of... So it wasn't just ground crew and air corps guys, it was bringing over all sorts of...
Well, the reason I would prefer not to go on a cruise anymore is that we were fed twice a day. One day out of Liverpool, there was a riot on the boat. They broke into the bread room because we were all so hungry. Now, of course, I understand that cruises today are not quite that difficult. Cruises today, they feed you from 5 in the morning till midnight. But that wasn't the case on my first cruise. So I'm afraid I'm a little brainwashed.
What about music? Did you listen to a lot of music, like radio and things? How did you find... So I remember reading that the German radio stations played better music than the British radio stations.
I don't remember that. Speaking of music, going over to keep us amused rather than being bored, we had a show, and they had dressed me up as Frank Sinatra, and I was supposed to sing, and they had some men in the audience who were supposed to faint, make believe they were fainting from my singing. And I would sing with a broom, and they put wires into my jacket as if it were a zoot suit. You know, at that time the style was very wide shoulders. That was the fun part of it.
How long did it take you, that crossing?
14 days.
You got seasick?
No, I never did. As a matter of fact, I remember enjoying being in the front of the ship as it was going up and down with the waves and all that, until the MPs chased me because it was too dangerous and everybody had to be below deck. 18 is a little different from 83, isn't it?
Yeah. Have you been back to England since?
Yes, when we had our reunion at Seething, which was wonderful to see. It sure brought you back.
Okay. This tape's going to run out, so before it